Back. Glad to have everybody here.
We just came.
Excellent, yeah. After yesterday, I think we're all warmed up. We're all warmed up and ready for another hike. So I think we're just going to turn it over to the big man here and let him go. So let me introduce our hike leader for today. Very happy to have Bjorn back for our third year. Yeah. Hey guys, everybody, starting over here. Bjorn Skaptason.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, and thank you for welcoming me back to another, to share another program with you with Shiloh Discussion Group. As Perry said, it's my third year of doing this, but I heard Mona counting off how many years you've been doing this a few minutes ago. What? 13 years. 13 years, so I have to catch up. I have to catch up a little bit. I haven't done as many of these. You got to go 10 more years before I get my toaster oven. Good. Well, I'll work on it. Yeah, I'm Bjorn Skaptason, and I'm thrilled to be back with you. A long time ago when I was a student, I got to be a seasonal ranger here at Shiloh, and I got to live on the park and walk all around it and just kind of find my way around, and at the same time learn the topic of the Battle of Shiloh. So I'm thrilled to come back and share these long-form, terrain-specific, tactical level, hopefully imaginative programs about the Civil War and about the Battle of Shiloh. It's also really great that I get to lead the second day of programs so that you're all warmed up. So that Dr. Smith has you all warmed up and
worn out.
And you know about Tillman Branch. You know, you learned about Tillman Branch yesterday. So when we cross it today, you're going to be ready, right? And then you're going to find your way around it. I did notice that the park used their social media to announce that the snakes are awake, that they're out there. I didn't see any yesterday. Did anybody see snakes yesterday? Good. But let's give our neighbors the snakes a wide berth today if we see any of them. Be careful, stepping over logs. You know, use all your best practices. But we didn't see any yesterday. I don't think we're going to see any today. And so that'll be great. And you just would rather, Jody would just rather not know. Just rather not know. Good. Like the 6 Mississippi. I'd rather not know what's over that hill. I'm sure it'll be fine.
I saw a big Braxton down there, right down here a couple of years ago. She was huge.
Okay, let's get started. Because we have a lot of ground to cover today. Today's program is a pre-traditional military history tactical level program called Cleburne and His Command. And we are going to follow the Confederate Brigade led by Patrick Ronan Cleburne across the battlefield. And I know a lot of people are already interested in Patrick Cleburne and his biography and the services of the people that served under him. We're going to let Mona fly the flag for Hardy's. Is that your truck, Mona? You've got the Hardy flag on it? Yeah, there we go. We've got the Hardy flag, which is also Cleburne's. Cleburne's guys carried it as their corps flag on that day. So it's going to be an interesting program. It's also going to be a program that covers a lot of terrain. It's going to be a program where the material we cover is going to be pretty hard because these guys start the battle first and they suffer immense casualties and go through immense hardship as they fight their way. And we're only going to fight our way across the first day of the Battle of Shiloh for Cleburne's command today. And so there's going to be a lot of material like that to cover. We're going to figure out how a large and powerful unit gets whittled down during the course of just a few hours here at the battle. And we're going to learn about their commander, Patrick Cleburne, and what he experienced and what he learned, hopefully, what he clearly did learn in his first battle commanding troops in active combat. So that is what we're going to try to cover today. We're going to cover, gosh, it must be 5 or 8 miles or something like that. It depends on how much terrain we cover going back and forth around dead trees. But that's about what it's going to be. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of fun because this is a really fun topic. It's a really fun subject from the point of Patrick Cleburne. A really fun subject from the point of view of his soldiers and his command. So we're going to learn a little bit about some of that. And we're going to cover the ground they covered and experience some of what they experienced on the 6th of April, 1862. Patrick Ronan Cleburne, born in, I already pronounced his middle name 3 times differently, and I don't. And the thing is, you read biographies, and at least one of them, the Irving Buck biography, has the Irving Buck trying to figure out how his middle name was pronounced, and he even has 2 or 3 versions of it. Patrick Ronan Cleburne. Born in 1828 in Ireland, in the Cork County, Ireland. And so, an Irishman of birth, and but also kind of a unicorn, as Irishmen go. Depending on which Irishman you talk to, unicorn's a polite way to put it. But as Craig Simons wrote in his biography of Patrick Cleburne, when Cleburne was born in Cork in 1828, he was born on a powder keg. He was born in a society that was getting very close to the breaking point. And the entire island of Ireland had already developed conflict between religious conflict between Catholic and Protestant, and between and a lot of political conflict because there's a lot of reaction against what most Irish saw as English occupation. So of course you have the large majority Catholic population and a minority of a minority of some Irish, Scots-Irish Protestants, typically Presbyterian congregations in the northeastern 8 counties of Ireland, Ulster. There's some conflict there. There's certainly conflict in the 20th century. A lot of us remember that. And there's some conflict there. But there's this third version of an Irish person, which comes down to us as either the Anglo-Irish or Church of Ireland Irish. And it's a tiny population, and it's the population that includes the people that own most of the island. And most of everybody else is tenants working on the farms of these people. Typically it's called Anglo-Irish, so that's the word that I'm going to use right now. But there are other ways of explaining. Well, he's growling about our guy already. And indeed, Patrick Cleburne was born into that third, either religious or ethnic group, the way you want to look at it. His family was not particularly wealthy. His father was a doctor, and when he was born, they lived in a town, but they happened to belong to this small minority that included the people that owned most of the most of the island, and the relationship between those people that own the land and the people that work the land, the tenants, was coercive, and was leading in 1828 right up to what we're going to see in the 1846, 1847, when the famine comes, a total breakdown in Irish society. Everything they grew was for export, and it benefited the people that owned the land, and the people that worked the land didn't get anything from it. When the potato crops failed, when blight killed the crops, there was no infrastructure to feed millions of people, and no inclination from the people who were in charge to cease their coercive form of labor. That's going to lead to, in the 1840s, to the Great Famine, and then the Great Migration, mostly to North America. So that's the context in which we're going to look at this. Now, that doesn't necessarily affect young Pat Cleburne when he's young. He does live in a middle-class family, and he got good education at a local school, and eventually his father rented an estate, so they did take over being landlords over a few tenants. And by that time, Patrick was away at school, and the school that he was at did have some military aspect to it, a sort of military. I think they did a little bit of drill, a little bit of military stuff. There was a local garrison. Dr. Cleburne, Dr. Joseph Cleburne, was like an on-call doctor for the local British garrison, and the headmaster of the school was a preacher that often preached at the garrison. And so again, Cleburne, even as a little kid, had exposure to soldiers nearby, and he liked that. He liked that idea of he saw military life, he saw the garrison life, and he liked it. Eventually, when Cleburne's father died, and his father died when he was young, the whole idea of having this estate, having the tenant farmers on it, had not worked out for the Cleburnes. And when Pat Cleburne's older brother looked at the finance and took over the household, it was clear that they were in the red and that things were going to go bad pretty quickly. And so Pat Cleburne, young Pat Cleburne, still a teenager, decided, well, I don't want to put any burden on my family, on my brother and my mother, trying to keep the household going. So he worked to become an apprentice to a pharmacist in a local town. And so young Pat Cleburne went off, spent 2 or 3 years as an apprentice pharmacist, and became very good at it in a practical sense. He was a practical pharmacist because he was the apprentice of somebody who was already a pharmacist. He wished to get into pharmacy school and make that his career, but here's the part about why I bring up he was a practical pharmacist. In order to study pharmacy or even medicine in the 19th century in Dublin, one had to have a thorough command of classic languages. Even before they were admitted, they would have had to be fluent in classical Greek and Latin. And then all of the instruction would have been in Latin. And Pat didn't have any of that. He knew how to, he knew the drugs. He knew how to actually practically work a pharmacy, but he didn't know that. And so he, first on one occasion he applied, he didn't get in. And then finally, he decided, he must have been just about not quite 18, he decided to go to Dublin, present himself at the college, and try to just convince them that he could do it. And he could not convince them because he didn't have enough Latin and Greek. He was so embarrassed, at least the way he would tell it to friends later, he was so embarrassed that he just marched right down to the local garrison and enlisted in the British Army. Didn't write his family, and he didn't stay in touch with them for more than a year. He just went and joined the army. And he even understood that the regiment he was joining would deploy to India. I mean, he really thought, I'm at the bottom, you know, this is the worst thing that could ever, the most embarrassing thing that could ever happen to me. I'm going to join the army. Being a kid, maybe it's more like running away to join the circus. I don't know. But he joined the army. Some of the local social unrest that was rising up at that time affected him right away because his regiment didn't deploy. They were required to keep the peace in Dublin. And so Patrick Cleburne never did go to India and never did go into battle with the British Army. But of course now he's in the British Army. He's learning drill, and he's learning soldier life, and he's learning a very regimented, formal way of soldiering. And he works his way up to corporal, and then works his way quickly back down to private. I think he told the story that they were going to do a march, and he thought his backpack was too heavy, so he put a pillow in it, and then there was a surprise inspection. And so Corporal Cleburne immediately went back to Private Cleburne. But after about a year, maybe 18 months, he was recognized by a captain in another company of his regiment who was a friend of his family. And the captain goes, "Pal, what are you doing here? What are you doing as a private in the British Army?" And he told him the story. He said, no, you got to get back in touch with your family. And he got him writing. He got back in touch with the family. Pretty soon after that, Cleburne started thinking to himself, I do not want to be in the Army. I do not want my career track to be 50 years and then sergeant, and then both the privates and the officers hate me. And it's not good money, and it's not a good career. At the same time, an inheritance from his father was going to become due. He was turning 21. And an inheritance was coming due. He was going to have some money. You couldn't, the British Army at the time, you didn't really have like an enlistment. When you joined, you belonged. And if you wanted to get out, you had to find some way to get out, some way to legally quit. And one way to do it was to buy your way out. Just take money and buy your way out. And so he got an inheritance. He had a little bucket of money. He didn't want to be in the army anymore. He bought his way out. Went back home. His brother and his mother had already made the decision that this was not going to work, and we're going to move to America. And the family decided to move to America. Patrick and his sister and his younger brother, I think, went first. And like a lot of other Irish immigrants at the time, what happened in the 1860s depended on the ticket they bought on the ship in 1850. And they booked passage on a ship that went to New Orleans, not New York. And so they went to New Orleans. They were supposed to scout ahead for the rest of the family. Very quickly, I'm going to just get out of his biography as quickly as I can here. But we get Patrick Cleburne to America. He lands in New Orleans, takes a riverboat up, gets to Cincinnati, finds work in a pharmacy, and after just a few months, he meets a fellow from Helena, Arkansas, Dr. Charles Nash. Mona, you have his book, don't you? Is it Charles Nash? I think, yeah. If not, Tony will edit all this out in the video. Nash, Dr. Nash, but he was a guy. It was a doctor who was going to open a pharmacy in Helena, Arkansas, a river town that's just a new frontier river town, and he's in Cincinnati looking for a pharmacist. And Patrick Cleburne goes, "How about me?" And actually, he was recommended by friends. That's an important thing in Cleburne's life and biography. He keeps getting recommended by friends that he's impressed. He's not hugely ambitious in, ooh, look at me, look at me. He's usually proving himself through his performance in whatever job he does. And someone goes, "Oh, you should hire Cleburne. He's good." And so Cleburne moved to Arkansas, and very quickly, Helena, Arkansas became his people, his community, his town. It was a crazy town. It was a crazy frontier river town lots of fighting and violence, lots of political violence. During his first few years there, he had a bit of a Whiggish view of the local politics, in that he liked the idea of internal improvements. The Whigs of the 19th century were largely for the government taking a role in internal improvements, improving the rivers, improving streams, eventually trains, so on and so forth. By the 1854, 1856 election, the Whigs were overtaken by a social aspect, a social and cultural aspect that attacked their party, ideology that attacked their party, that we remember as the Know-Nothings. The Know-Nothings, a virulently anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic, and pro-temperance movement that sort of eventually overshadowed the more practical internal improvements part of the Whig. Well, Cleburne wasn't going to be a know-nothing. He was an immigrant, so and a lot of his neighbors were Democrats and conservatives, and so he became a Democrat, and again became very much in line with his mentally and ideologically in line with his new neighbors and his new friends. One of them was Thomas Heineman, a local attorney, and they'd go out and politic together. And in one case, politicking in Helena at the time involved firearms and knives and so on. And at least in one occasion, Cleburne was out with his buddy Heineman, and somebody decided to kill Heineman, and they were shooting, and Cleburne ended up shot, and so he had this experience of almost getting shot to death when he was still a civilian, and but he recovered, but that's Helena. That's the life he's living. But they are his people now. He really enjoys this community, enjoys his town. He has good friends. They're loyal to him. He's loyal to them. And the secession crisis rolls around, especially by the summer of 1860, the election. People start talking about the need to organize a company in case whatever. It could be during the summer of 1860, the political election, they were worried possibly about a slave insurrection. And so we need to organize militia for that. Or that somehow John Brown, some John Brownish person would come down and do in Arkansas what he did in Virginia. The fact that we know that would have been totally impossible doesn't mean that they weren't concerned that it would happen. And so they formed a company called the Yell Rifles. And here they had a guy who'd been in the British Army. And so they elected him captain, and it was Patrick Cleburne. And so Patrick Cleburne commanded from the time of the 1860 political campaigns. He commanded this local Helena company of militia, and he drilled them, and they became very good very quickly. By the time secession comes around, the Yell Rifles immediately start to expand, and more people join. Other companies come together, and again, Cleburne is the guy that can do the training. An interesting part of his sort of character is that Cleburne was very much an immigrant that wanted to assimilate into his community. So he did not have a Irish, I'm an Irishman sort of feeling to him, sort of a cultural feeling to him. He was just, now I'm doing this. And one of the things he did is he worked very hard to get rid of his accent. And so if we had been able to hear Patrick Cleburne talking to us, he would not have been some sort of comical, deep Irish brogue or something like that. He probably would have had sort of a southern inflection like his neighbors. But the exception was he didn't seem to pay attention to his attempts to change his accent when he was giving orders on the drill ground. So when he was training his guys on the drill ground, it was like an Irish sergeant major you know, or ordering people around, and then as soon as drill was over, he'd go back to sounding just like everybody else. That's at least one of the stories about personal stories about Cleburne. Anyway, the war comes. Let's get the war going, because we need to start getting Cleburne to Shiloh. The war comes. The Yell Rifles and all these other new companies decide to join the Confederate Army, join the Arkansas Volunteers. They're going to become the Confederate Army, part of the Confederate Army. They go to Little Rock. They get organized into a regiment. The regiment becomes the 15th Arkansas Regiment, and Pat Cleburne is made the colonel of the 15th Arkansas Regiment. So he goes from just the guy, and within a year, he goes from a pharmacist who knows how to drill soldiers to a colonel commanding 1,000 men, the 15th Arkansas Regiment. And their first assignment is in northeastern Arkansas, where a small Confederate army under General Joseph Hardee is getting organized, and they go up there, and for the first time, Pat Cleburne meets Joseph Hardee, and they become friends very quickly, and they're going to remain friends and colleagues for the rest of Cleburne's life. And so there's, through the summer of 1861, they train and drill and campaign in northeast Arkansas. There aren't any battles. Eventually, they are transferred across the river from Columbus, where General Polk has his troops. They are sent on to central Kentucky, and Hardee and Cleburne and all these troops become part of General Albert Sidney Johnston's army at Bowling Green in central Kentucky. At that time, Colonel Cleburne becomes a de facto brigade commander, as Hardee entrusts him with a couple more regiments, just 2 or 3 more regiments. So he comes in contact with he's got his 15th Arkansas, and then he comes in contact with being the overall commander of the 15th Arkansas and the 5th Tennessee Regiment under Colonel Benjamin Hill, and then shortly the 6th Mississippi Regiment under Colonel John Thornton join him up there in Kentucky. And at least 3 of these regiments begin to work with Colonel Cleburne as their brigade commander, and he continues to have a very hands-on approach, especially to training and commanding. And all 3 of these regiments benefit from Cleburne's talent as a trainer. And so Cleburne's command starts to come together in Kentucky, particularly these 3 regiments, the 15th Arkansas, the 5th Tennessee, Hill's 5th Tennessee, and Thornton's 6th Mississippi. Well, we know the events, but I have to go through them again. General Grant attacks up the Tennessee River. The Tennessee River campaign begins in January of 1862. Grant takes Fort Henry. Grant takes Fort Donaldson. A few weeks before that, General Thomas won the battle at Fishing Creek in eastern Kentucky, and General Johnston's Kentucky line totally collapsed. And the force from Bowling Green had to fall back to Nashville with the fall of Fort Donaldson on the Cumberland River. Nashville was given up, and they all fell back to northern Alabama. Thence the concentration at Corinth, Mississippi by late March of 1862. And in that, General Hardee comes along with all of his troops, and General Cleburne comes along with General Hardee. Colonel Cleburne had gotten promoted to general within this time. I don't have the date of his promotion, but it's General Patrick Cleburne by this time. And so as the Confederate Army comes together under Beauregard and Bragg in Corinth in the last week of March and the first week of April 1862, Hardee becomes the commander of the 3rd Corps of Johnston's army. And the 3rd Corps of Johnston's army has 3 brigades. And it's going to be Shaver's Arkansas Brigade, Wood's Brigade, and Cleburne's Brigade. And then other regiments are quickly added to Cleburne's commands. The 24th Tennessee is added to Cleburne's commands. The 23rd and 24th Tennessee, which are newer regiments, added to Cleburne's command. And then the 2nd Tennessee Regiment at the very last minute shows up under Colonel William Bate. And even while they're at Corinth, the 2nd Tennessee Regiment re-enlisted and reorganized from a Tennessee State Regiment to a Confederate regiment. And so at the last minute, Colonel Bate and his 2nd Tennessee were added to Cleburne's command, making one of the largest, if not the largest, brigades in General Johnston's army. 3,600 men present, almost 3,000 of them, somewhere between 2,700 and 3,000 Confederate soldiers active duty, ready to fight in this battle. That's going to be a big brigade, by the way. If you don't know the size of the typical size of Civil War brigades, eventually they even out at most brigades on both sides of somewhere around 1,500 soldiers. That turns out to be the most manageable size for a brigade. But Cleburne is going to come into this battle with just shy of 3,000. And a very big brigade. 3 of his regiments are new, but 3 of his regiments are his core, his old-timers, his hardcore guys. And so, from the 3rd of April 1862, they march out of Corinth with the rest of the army. It takes a long time to cover the ground. We've told that story many times before. The rain, the confusion. Apparently, General Johnston thought it was all perfectly puerile. The confusion there around Mickey's house. But eventually it was Cleburne's command that was the first in line as Hardee marched out of that confusion and marched up to the Union camps, took a position that we're going to go to in a few minutes, and he's on the left of Hardee's front line. To his right is General Sterling Wood, Sam Wood, and to the right of Wood is Shaver, and then eventually they're going to bring Gladden up from Bragg's corps to finish out Hardee's line of battle. But Cleburne arrives first, he's in front, and he deploys on the left. So by the time we get Cleburne and his command to the battlefield at Gettysburg, I thought you'd show that. I planned that. By the time they get to the battlefield at Antietam, they are ready to, by the time they get to Shiloh, they're on the left. They're on the Confederate left, and they need to connect with the Confederate right. The left has to connect with Owl Creek. I know we've talked about this in a lot of different programs, but these creeks are crucially important. They hold the flanks of the army. So Cleburne, it's going to be his job on the 5th of April and on the morning of the 6th of April to keep contact on his left with Owl Creek. And we'll talk about that in a little bit when we actually get up to where they're doing that. So, okay, there we go. We've taken a little time to sort of get our minds warmed up, right? We've gotten Pat Cleburne from County Cork, Ireland in 1828 to Hardin County, Tennessee in 1862. So let's get our legs warmed up, and from here we are going to go straight to the place where General Cleburne deployed his command for the attack on General Grant's Union camps. Are you ready to go?
Yes, sir.
Then let's go. It's right in Craig Simon's type. Stonewall of the West.
I want to say, I think years ago when Aqualand was in business, we were here, but I was a child, so I don't remember. My folks said.
The first position of Cleburne's brigade on the morning of April 6, 1862. They arrived here on April 5th, on April 5th. This particular tablet is a really good tablet Some of the tablets around Shiloh are just kind of basic information. This regiment was here at this time. This brigade was here at this time. This is a particularly good tablet in that it tells you a lot of information if you stop and read it, and if you know how to read it. Specifically, it says Cleburne's Brigade, and then in the same size font, covering the entire tablet, it says 15th Arkansas Skirmishers. So even if you know nothing else about the vibe in the brigade, the culture of the brigade, I guess you call it the tactical culture of the brigade in military theories these days, it would be that the 15th Arkansas is a particularly well-trusted regiment in Cleburne's brigade. Now you know he organized the 15th Arkansas. They're his guys. And the job of providing skirmish cover for the brigade, if it falls to the 15th Arkansas, that should make sense to us. They're his guys. They're Cleburne's command, his original command. And it's also, I wouldn't call it unusual, because certainly at Shiloh you see plenty of examples of an entire regiment being deployed to provide skirmishers for a brigade, but it's not uncommon for a brigadier to have each regiment send out their own skirmishers, and then have no one regiment out front. Each of the regiments takes care of their own front. That's not uncommon. It is common at the Battle of Shiloh to see a brigadier send a whole regiment out to cover the front. But this tells us here's the 15th Arkansas in large letters in the skirmish line. Yes, that does mean this is a particularly well-trusted regiment for the brigade commander, Patrick Cleburne, the 15th Arkansas. And he says he deploys them as skirmishers across the entire front with a reserve. Remember, a skirmish line always has skirmishers out front and then a reserve behind it, and then only behind the reserve is your main line of battle. That gives you 3 lines of battle when you deploy skirmishers. Skirmish line, reserve, and the main line of battle. Now, the deployment of the rest of the regiments also tells some stories. The 6th Mississippi and the 5th Tennessee are adjacent to each other. Those are both regiments that Cleburne commanded in Kentucky and is known for a long time. The 23rd Tennessee is on the right, and the 24th Tennessee is on the left of Hill's 5th Tennessee. The Bates 2nd Tennessee Regiment, who we've already met as people who were just attached to the brigade, albeit they are veteran soldiers. Bates Regiment enlisted as soon as I think even before. I don't know the date, so I'm not gonna make a claim on that. But they are early enlistees in the Tennessee, what Governor Isham Harris considered his Tennessee Army, and they've only just converted to being Confederates. So they've been in the service for a long time, and they have a lot of experience, but they're brand new to Cleburne's brigade. And so Cleburne has them out on the left, and he has them deployed to the rear, about 500 yards. And the reason for that is that Cleburne's first mission here on the 5th of April is to connect his left to Owl Creek. We've got to have guys in the mud on Owl Creek. Make sure nobody can get around our left. And that is going to be Bate, and Bate is going to move down there, but also be behind the rest of the brigade. And you can see they're making that choice so that they're being doubly careful that nobody can either get around the end or cross the creek and go down and come over, something like that. So Bates' 2nd Tennessee is refused to the rear of the rest of the brigade. Then you have the main line of the brigade. Then you have the reserve of the 15th Arkansas. Then you have the skirmishers of the 15th Arkansas. And that's the way he has the brigade set up on the 5th of April, right on up to the morning of the 6th of April. And they lay here, like the rest of the Confederates, they lay here on their arms throughout the night of April 5 and 6, waiting for the orders to advance in the morning. Now, another mission takes priority for General Cleburne once the sun comes up on April 6th. And that is his orders from General Hardee, his commander, to maintain contact with General Wood's brigade on his right. And so Sterling Wood is right over here. And we've all visited Sterling Wood's positions before, right? That's Fraley Field. That's where the battle's going to start. That's where the 3rd Mississippi skirmishers cover the front of Sterling Wood's brigade. And so if we were to follow Cleburne's large brigade with a lot of front right on down to the end, you'd find the left of Wood, and you'd find that Cleburne has important orders from Hardee that as we advance, stay in contact with Wood on your right. That's going to be more important than rushing forward and attacking the Yankees. That's going to be more important than keeping contact with the left on Owl Creek, because they're going to lose contact with Owl Creek as they advance. But once the advance begins on the morning of April 6th, it is imperative for Cleburne to stay in contact with Wood on the right. It's almost more important than paying attention to what's going on in front of him. But of course, Cleburne can be comfortable with what's going on in front of him because his guys, the 15th Arkansas, are deployed as skirmishers and leading the way. And if they run into anything, he's going to know about it. Also, Cleburne has a lot of artillery when the battle starts. Calvert, Trigg, and Hubbard's Arkansas batteries, an entire battalion of artillery, is attached to his brigade. So potentially, Cleburne's command can do a lot of hard fighting and a lot of effective fighting in this battle once it gets going. 6:30 a.m. is when Cleburne gets his orders to advance. Who knows what time the battle began in Fraley Field?
About an hour before, isn't it?
About an hour before. Has anybody ever been there?
4:55.
Yeah, 4:55. 4:55 is when we do our Fraley's Field programs. We're in Fraley's Field at 4:55. So that is when the battle begins. I often repeat this no matter what we're talking about because I want people that walk the battlefield to understand this. The battle does not begin with the Confederates rushing into the Yankee camp, shouting their rebel yells and with their bayonets fixed, and the Yankees are all in bed or fixing breakfast and they run around. It does not begin that way. The first shot is fired at roughly 5 in the morning, and the orders for Cleburne to begin his advance come at 6:30. So the fight in Fraley Field is a full 90 minutes. And a lot of the fights we're going to talk about today last 10 or 15 minutes. So I think when we walk the battlefield and we learn a lot of these fights, it's easy to lose the perspective, the time perspective in our minds. When the battle starts, when Major Powell's patrol meets Major Hardcastle's skirmishers, they're going to do that fight for 90 minutes before the Confederates even begin their slow advance toward the Union camps. All right, but 6:30 in the morning, General Cleburne gets his orders to advance. That's the same time that General Wood is now advancing over there and Major Powell is retreating out of Fraley Field. And in that same moment, Cleburne begins to advance with the 15th Arkansas skirmishing in front of them. He says they advance. We'll take up more of this at our next stop, which is we're just going to backtrack. But he says they advanced more or less without opposition. So There is some accounts of from the Union pickets of them fighting and falling back, but at least from the perception of the Confederates in Cleburne's brigade, they advanced unopposed to their next position. Let's go. We're going back to the gun line.
Yours.
Yeah. Hey, that'd be a great idea.
Let's do that.
Yeah, let's get a photo.
Ben, this way?
Yes. Straight. This would be the
This
center.
road was here?
Yeah.
So this was coming from Corinth.
Well, the main Corinth Road was over here. This is more of a country road.
Okay.
By road.
But they were advancing along this roadway.
Yes. Yeah. They advanced pretty quickly. We have this is the gun line here. Over on the left are the batteries that are part of General Cleburne's brigade. Now, as I mentioned right before we left, Cleburne received his orders to advance at 6:30. Advanced with the 15th Arkansas in front. Stated in his report that they advanced without opposition. I think it depends on how one defines opposition. There were pickets. There were Union pickets from Colonel Jesse Hildebrand's 3rd Brigade of Sherman's division, and there were 4th Brigade pickets out as well. So if resistance would be Union pickets falling back, stopping behind a tree to take an aim and take a pot shot at their pursuers and then turning and running, there's that kind of fighting going on. And if the resistance is the skirmishers of the 15th Arkansas hurry ahead and make contact with the Union outposts and exchange fire with them, then we can call that an engagement. What General Cleburne is talking about is that nothing that the enemy did stopped or slowed us down. We did not break stride during the course of our advance between 6:30 and the time they reached here. We came to this position because the tablet tells us the exact time that this battery, the Washington Artillery of Louisiana, fired its first shot at 7:10 in the morning. And multiple accounts say that the first artillery fire was 7:10 or 7:11 or something like that. That comes both from Confederates shooting and Federals getting shot at. And then they check their watches and say, well, it's 7:10, 7:11, something like that. Now, the circumstances of the first fire are this. Cleburne has been advancing. He's been regulating his advance to the speed of General Wood's advance on his right, because he has orders to maintain contact with General Wood. By this time, he has lost contact on his left with Owl Creek. There's no way that Colonel Bate and his 2nd Tennessee can stretch all the way down to Owl Creek from here. So they've lost contact there, and they've abandoned that part of their mission. In the overall picture, the Confederate commanders, General Beauregard, is going to send a brigade around the left to extend the left beyond Cleburne's left in order to try to reach Owl Creek that way, Colonel Preston Pond's brigade. But the first thing on Cleburne's mind is now to advance in coordination with General Wood on the right. He's still not really thinking too much about the Yankees in his front. We'll deal with them when we get there. But for now, the important thing is that the entire corps, the 3 brigades of Hardee's corps plus Gladden's way over there on the right, advance together so that they all attack the Federal camp at the same time. That's more important than rushing up and surprising the Yankees. If I need to harken back one more time to these myths that we keep coming up against, you know, there's no motivation to rush up into the Yankee camps. The orders are to advance as a coordinated, contiguous line of assault. Therefore, General Cleburne places himself personally on the right of his brigade. He's not in the center of his brigade, he's on the right of his brigade. The unit he is closest to is the 23rd Tennessee Regiment. And under Lieutenant Colonel Cantrell. And Cleburne has with him as a volunteer aide Colonel Colonel Matt Martin, who has recently resigned his position as Colonel of the 23rd Tennessee, but he hasn't gone home yet. And so he's participating in this battle. Matt Martin is participating in this battle with the rank of Colonel and a volunteer aide to General Cleburne. But Cleburne's on the right, okay? That's where he is personally. Now, as he reaches this position, his brigade is deployed along with the rest of the corps astride the main Corinth Road. The main Corinth Road is right out here, and they've been advancing along it with roughly with General Wood and Colonel Shaver adjacent to the road. The road runs more or less in a southwest to northeast direction. They came from Corinth, they're going to Pittsburgh Landing, they're moving from the southwest to the northeast, and Hardee's Corps maintains a relationship to that road that is roughly perpendicular. You know, the center of the corps follows the road, everybody else sweeps along on the side. This is important, and then General Cleburne realizes this at about 7 o'clock when his brigade tops this ridge, and he realizes that the federal camps are off to his left. General Sherman's division is camped on the other side of Shiloh Branch, facing Shiloh Branch, in anticipation if they get attacked, they could use Shiloh Branch as a defense, and therefore they are over there and they are facing due south. And every step to the northeast places General Cleburne's flank exposed to General Sherman's camp. Right now it looks like they're about to attack the camp with an oblique relationship to the defenders, which isn't going to be any good at all. They're not going to be facing their enemies. Their enemies are going to be shooting down from the side. That's going to keep happening during the course of the day. But right now, General Cleburne recognized that problem, and he had a couple of his cannons. He told his artillery commander, take a couple of your cannons and shoot off there to the south and wake them up. Wake up the Yankees. That's what's happening at 7:10 in the morning of April 6th. Both sides agree the first cannon fire is at 7:10, and no infantry contact is made yet. At this point, though, very shortly after this, it's time for the entire brigade, for the entire corps to move forward. And Cleburne is still concerned with his right, so he's still personally on the right, and they will move directly forward to the northeast toward the enemy camps. Now there are enemy camps directly ahead of us, roughly east of us. It's because elements of Hildebrand's 3rd Brigade of Sherman's division, the 53rd Ohio Regiment, camped on the wrong side of Shiloh Branch, and they're still camped there. And so Cleburne is advancing directly toward a Union camp, but the majority of Sherman's camps are past the left flank of Cleburne's brigade as he advances. All right, make sense? Let's take a reading. I think from here, if we go roughly 90 degrees, roughly east, we should follow Cleburne himself as they advance on the Confederate position. I think it's close. Although we'll go. Let's go the easy way. All right. There you go. I just think I thought I hit that extra end, but I just couldn't do it yesterday. Did I outdo you on him?
Yeah, good recovery.
Good recovery.
Well, I try not to go down too bad. I think what I was thinking 6 weeks ago.
We all live our own realities. Everybody's fine. On some low ground, right? And they found some low ground here too. And so at this point, again, General Cleburne is with the right of his brigade. At this point, as the brigade comes off the hill and into this low ground, they encounter what General Cleburne describes as an almost impassable morass. An almost impassable morass. If for our purposes, we'll define a morass as a swamp with the added value of thorns growing out of it, thorns and vines and all that kind of stuff. But I also want to stop here because the Shiloh National Military Park is a battlefield, but it's also a nice park. It's a really beautiful place to be, and it would be a lot less beautiful if they permitted an almost impassable morass to exist in the middle of the places where people want to learn about the battle. So most of the drainage in this area, which is 3 different creeks falling into one area, which is why it created this swamp in the day, have been channeled out. And there's only one small area that is really like it was on the morning of April 6th. And we're going to jump into it in a little while. But but generally speaking, this is much nicer than the impassable morass that these guys encountered. And the scale of the almost impassable morass was much larger on that morning than it is now. And so this brings us to what happens with General Cleburne. He and his brigade attack in a northeasterly direction, and when they encounter the almost impassable morass, Cleburne and 2 of his regiments, the 23rd Tennessee on the right and the 6th Mississippi on his left, bear to the right of the almost impassable morass, and the rest of the brigade bears to the left. Now there's 2 things that are happening on the left of the brigade, and we're going to talk about them in detail in a minute, but one of them is they're going to need to try to skirt the swamp on their right, and second, by the time they get here, they know that the Yankees are on their left, not in front of them. And so the rest of the brigade, we'll talk about it more when we get there, but they're going to be reorienting and attacking to the north, while these 2 regiments, the 23rd Tennessee on the right and the 6th Mississippi on the left, continue to advance to the south. Northeast. Thank you. Northeast. And so the brigade, almost 3,000 people when it started, has already been shivered in 2 pieces. And some of them are going this way and some of them are going that way, and they're moving away from each other as they go around the swamp. So we're going to follow General Cleburne with Lieutenant Colonel Cantrell in the 23rd Tennessee and Colonel John Thornton. They're on the right, and Colonel John Thornton in the 6th Mississippi Regiment, they're on the left, and continue straight toward the Union camp that they could see directly facing them from the top of the other hill. It's the camp of the 53rd Ohio Regiment, and they're going to move directly out of the swamp and toward the front of that camp. So let's follow them.
Yeah. The Ray Field, let's orient ourselves to it really quickly. It's a Union camp. Where we're standing right now is the camp of the 53rd Ohio Regiment, Colonel Jesse J. Appler. The Ray Field is all of this area with the camp tents being over here. The houses of the farm over here where the Mississippi Monument is now. And this field here, you see where the trees start now? No trees at that time. This field line is right, okay? The eastern field line is right, the southern field line is not. And in the day, the creek flowed, as we saw just when we crossed it, flows from the southeast to the northwest, where it's going to fall into the impassable morass. Therefore, this field, when you look at it on a map, narrows into a point. As these trees go whoop, and the creek goes like that. But nevertheless, so when you look down from here on that morning, if you're perhaps at the monument where the 53rd Ohio Monument is right now, you see all the way down to the Say Field, with maybe trees intervening between the fields and then what's called Reconnoitering Road. All the way down to the road, the Peabody Road or the Reconnoitering Road. And from here, as General Wood's brigade crosses the creek and breaks into the field and crosses it, General William T. Sherman can see the Confederates passing beyond the left of the 53rd Ohio and into the woods. It's General Sterling Wood's brigade. At the same time, because they're keeping close contact with Wood's brigade, some skirmishers, presumably from the 15th Arkansas, break from the creek, come up out of the brush. Now, at that time, these woods also were all the way back to the creek. So all that space between the creek and here that we went through woods was open at that time, with brush at the creek. The skirmishers came up. General Sherman happened to be over here looking in that direction. The skirmishers crested the ridge, and the skirmishers, again, whom I'll assume are members of the 15th Arkansas, fired upon General Sherman, struck him in the hand, killed his aide, and that's when General Sherman said, I realized that the entire camp was going to be under a general attack. It wasn't a raid or something else like that. Confederates were really attacking us. Now, following the 15th Arkansas, having fired that, one can presume that the skirmishers fell back to the main line of battle because they're not mentioned again. General Sherman leaves the field. Colonel Appler deployed his troops behind his camp in those wood lines. That wood line is correct. He deployed his troops behind the camp, lying down behind a rise of ground, which you can discern if you look across the field right now. If you lie down in those woods, we would not be able to see you. In front of him were his tents, and then the officers' tents, and then the hay park of the regiment where the animals live and where they store the hay, and they have wagons and so on and so forth. As the two regiments, the 23rd Tennessee over here and the 6th Mississippi right here, come up out of the low ground and come up onto the drill ground of the parade ground, the drill ground of the 53rd Ohio, they can see through the camp, and General Cleburne says that the Federals had constructed a breastwork of hay bales and other material behind their camp. He says behind their camp. And what that means, without him saying it, is that these two regiments are going to have to go through the camp to get to the 53rd Ohio. Now the camp, as we discussed a couple of years ago, and I'll very quickly discuss now, is tents. This is all tents, big Sibley style tents that they can house 20 people, and they're laid out 10 companies to a regiment, so they're laid out in 10 rows as each of the companies construct their tents like that. And then the next company over here and the next company over here. That means those 10 rows of tents leave 10 company streets, 10 lanes passing between the companies. This is going to be important in just a minute. We're at about 7:45, getting close to 8 o'clock in the morning. Well, General Sherman said it was about 8 o'clock when he got shot. So about 8 o'clock, these two regiments come up behind General Cleburne in line of battle. They reach the parade ground of the 53rd Ohio, and then they need to move through the camp in order to attack the Federals behind it. That means they break their organization, can't walk through tents, can't walk right through a tent with a line of battle. They break their organizations and they file into these company streets. No longer a line of battle facing to fight the enemy, but a long line of guys marching behind each other as they crowd through the company streets. A Union witness called it, he said the 6th Mississippi came crowding through the company streets. So the 6th Mississippi on the left, 23rd Tennessee coming up in this area, crowding through the company streets. They get as far as the line of officers' tents. Again, Union defenders tell us that the Confederates got as far as the officers' tents, which in terms of range would be between 25 and 50 yards from that wood line. At that point, Colonel Appler, leading the Ohioans, ordered his regiment to stand up. They had about 500 guys. They stand up, they leveled their rifles, and they fired into the Confederates at what you could only consider firing squad range. And the ability of the Mississippians at that moment to resist this volley would have been roughly equivalent to the victim of a firing squad resisting the people that are shooting at him. They were executed. They were shot down. 6 Mississippi guys particularly were shot down and executed by a point-blank volley right in their faces while they were stacked up in the company streets. Some of those guys in the Union line of battle, particularly the left in this area, Company B over here, were equipped with 57 caliber Enfield rifle muskets, fired that mini ball that goes spinning down range at high velocity. Mini ball has plenty of velocity at that short range to pass through one human target and kill somebody behind it. That is how close they are. Other guys in the regiment are shooting 69 caliber buck and balls. And again, at that close range, they're just shooting a cloud of lead that cannot possibly miss any target as it goes down range. The 6th Mississippi was eviscerated by the first volley, and they immediately fell back. Also, the 23rd Tennessee was surprised by the volley. They suffered heavy casualties and they fell back, and both regiments fell back down into the bottom. The 23rd Tennessee did not rally initially when they reached that bottom. They panicked and they fell back. They went all the way back to the creek. And General Cleburne turned to Colonel Matt Martin, their former commander. He says, Martin, go get your guys. You got to bring them back here. Colonel Cantrell, Lieutenant Colonel Cantrell was trying to rally them. Martin ran over there. But it's going to be a while before we see the 23rd Tennessee again. When they first were repulsed, they fell back, they lost their organization, and they were out of the battle. Immediately, to the contrary, immediately upon falling back to the bottom of the hill, the 6th Mississippi reformed. Colonel John Thornton was wounded in the leg in the first volley. And Colonel Robert Lowry, Major at that time, Major Robert Lowry, reformed the regiment, and then they attacked again. Now they knew what they were coming into, but they attacked again as they crested, as they got about to here. Again, part of the 53rd Ohio shot into them, but also by now, the cannons on the hill over here, Waterhouse's battery, and the cannons on the hill at Shiloh Church, Barrett's battery, and quite possibly Schwartz's battery, which has come up from General McClernand's division to reinforce, are all concentrating their fire just on this position. Now there is a concentration of 12 to 18 cannons directly firing onto this position as they make their second attack. They also encounter fire from their infantry fire from the left, as Hildebrand's infantry of Sherman's division are in position on the other side of the creek. Some fire from the 53rd Ohio, and again they fall back. Again, the survivors of the 6th Mississippi fall back and into the bottoms. Again they rally, and again they attack again. After the two attacks, what General Cleburne says is again and again the 6th Mississippi charged at the enemy. So I can't tell you exactly how many times they did. We have details of the first two attacks. But then we have General Cleburne say they just kept going again and again and again. The survivors kept attacking. At that second attack, Colonel Appler over here, he freaked out. Some of you know that story. He ordered his regiment to retreat and save themselves. Retreat and save yourself. And then so the 53rd Ohio exited, stayed right over here. And so they're not a part of this story anymore. But the 6th Mississippi kept attacking, probably over the course of 15 minutes to an hour. The regiment sustained over 70% casualties. The figure is what, 300 casualties out of 425 guys? I think I'm right about that. And it is one of the top 10 highest mortality rates for a single regiment in a single battle in any battle of the Civil War. The 6th Mississippi, the bloody 6th Mississippi here at Shiloh. And the vast majority of those losses happened in about 15 to 30 minutes in exactly where we're sitting and standing right now, as they tried again and again to attack through the 53rd Ohio camp. Now, there is a good chance that once the 53rd Ohio left, and once the 6th Mississippi was taking fire from their left, that their second, third, fourth, however many attacks they made, reoriented and became, instead of going this way, went that way. Nobody says that in any explicit account. It just makes sense that once they didn't have opposition over here, they were trying to attack the across the creek there. One member of the 6th Mississippi did remember we kept attacking the cannons over and over and over again. So the first two attacks weren't against cannons, but he remembered attacking the cannons. So that suggests that the following assaults were made more in this direction than in that direction. But the 6th Mississippi has been eviscerated. 400 started out, 325 are already on the ground. Or almost 325. They continued to fight, and they will lose more. The 23rd Tennessee is out of the fight for now. The right 2/3, the right 1/3 of Cleburne's command for the time being is already out of the battle. All right? So let's go around through the impassable morass and find out what's happening to the left of Cleburne's command.
Most of the guys in the trench probably 6 Mississippi.
I think so. Yeah, members of the 53rd Ohio wrote about burying 200
Okay.
in
That one.
one. Yeah.
Little small, but maybe.
Small compared to the other one.
Yeah.
But it was 15 minutes work.
Yeah. Yeah. Quick.
Yeah. Not as forbidding as it was on the morning of April 6, 1862. This is the place where the geography is as close as it was to the almost impassable morass that split up General Cleburne's division. Now, the majority of the brigade, I just said division. You say Cleburne's division for most Civil War battles. He's usually commanding Cleburne's brigade. Most of the brigade, he's not with it, and they're over here. And I'm going to leap forward a little bit, but when these guys are on the right, are repulsed, Cleburne comes over to check in with the left of his brigade, and then he comes back again to try to rally the right of the brigade. And during these comings and goings, he and his horse become mired in the almost impassable morass. The horse throws him. He says it was only with much difficulty that I even got out of the morass. So the morass is also depriving Cleburne's command of their commander for some period of time. The morass is doing this in two ways. In one way, literally physically trapping him, and in the other, splitting up the brigade so that Cleburne is now spending so much time in transit between one part of his command to the other that he's not actually commanding the brigade. The best he can do is leave an order for someone else to carry out and then try to get back around the morass to the other side, either from there to there to rally people, or from there to there to try to command the 2/3 of his brigade that are still fighting. Got it? So for the next little bit, Cleburne is going to take an exit from our story until he comes back a little bit later. We're going to continue on over here to the tablet, which interprets the Cleburne's attack. Okay?
And so he wasn't watching the other way. So they tell him, look to the right.
Yeah.
Good job. You see that?
Okay.
Yeah?
I mean, because he's having difficulty getting to where he needs to go.
Right. Now that
One educated question.
that's a great question. Now that Cleburne is out of contact with the regiment, who is the second in command? And I think it's a great question because built into your reasoning is probably the way we think of how the Army works, that there is a second in command. At the time of the Civil War, it's a much more informal organization. There is a commander of the brigade, and then each of the colonels commanding each of the regiments has a date of seniority based on the date that he got his commission. And so the senior most regimental commander he's not the second in command of the brigade. I think in 2024 that might be a dedicated job, and we would call it deputy commander of the brigade. He's not the deputy commander of the brigade, he's the commander of a regiment, and when the brigade commander is not present, the senior most colonel takes over. That might require a conference amongst the colonels in the middle of the battle where they all take out,
What's your paper say?
they all take out their commissions and everybody goes, okay, you go first.
Yeah.
So not necessarily designated.
Yeah, it's an informal. They probably know, but in this case, we've got a problem because the general commanding the brigade has not given up command of the brigade. He's just not here right this minute, and so whatever the brigade is going to do is going to be based on whatever orders they already have. And each of the colonels are going to continue to lead their regiments with the orders that they already have from General Cleburne. And the senior most colonel, that's you. The senior most colonel is Benjamin Hill of the 5th Tennessee Regiment. The 5th Tennessee Regiment is recruited early in the war in the middle part of Tennessee, the breadbasket of Tennessee. Colonel Hill is an attorney from McMinnville. Is that a town? Yeah. And it's over there, right?
Yeah, it's him.
Yeah. And he's an attorney from McMinnville, and he's the commander of the 5th Tennessee. They have also re-enlisted from Tennessee troops to being Confederate troops, and within a few weeks of the end of the battle, their designation will change for the rest of the war to the 35th Tennessee Regiment. I say that right up front because you may, in studying Shiloh, see this regiment identified as the 5th, open parentheses, 35th, close parentheses, Tennessee Regiment. And that's, David Reed trying to tell you that they're called the 5th on this day, but very soon they're going to become the 35th, and that's what they are for the rest of the war.
So they went to be Confederate regiment and then back to state regiment?
No, they started as a state regiment and converted once.
Converted once. So the
Started as the state 5th Tennessee,
Uh-huh.
and then converted to the Confederate 35th Tennessee Regiment.
But
So they
that's
went
not-
from 5th to 35th.
Okay, but it's not under state control. But,
Right, they're
when you say
becoming-
Confederate, I'm thinking Confederate nation.
Yeah, and they will be subject to the orders of Confederate generals, such as Bragg and
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he's asking about the regiment that had the Confederate designation.
Oh.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
Confederate designations. Yes,
Yeah.
okay. Well, they're not one part of this brigade, but there are Confederate regiments in the Johnston's army at Shiloh. And that is typically a designation that they used at the time to for a regiment that included significant numbers of men from more
Multiple
than
states,
one
yeah.
state.
Uh-huh.
And those regiments did not continue. At the reorganization of the Army, those regiments were broken up, and the Mississippians were moved to Mississippi regiments, and the Tennesseans were moved to Tennessee regiments. Yeah, we have a 2nd Confederate and a 3rd Confederate here, and they tend to be, those are either regiments that have half Tennessee, half Mississippi, and another one has half Mississippi, half Arkansas troops.
Okay.
But they're not Confederate regular Army. That would be an important designation.
Mm-hmm.
They're the same as everybody else. It's just that they're more than one state contributes to those regiments.
Got it.
Yeah. So, to get back to the left of Cleburne's command, they advance with Colonel Hill being the most senior regimental commander, but I can't tell you that there is a commander once Cleburne takes those 2 regiments to the right of the almost impassable morass. They just continue to advance as they have been advancing. They reorient to face the people that are shooting at them. So they were going that direction, now they're going this direction. And then they advance straight down the hill and into the impassable morass again, which is still here. Look around you. You can see 2 bridges. 2 bridges, 2 different branches of the creek come together and run parallel to each other. Turn around and look at what you got here. you got about 25 yards between two major creeks. Going one, come up out, go back in the other, do it again. And that continues all the way down there for more than 100 yards till the creeks finally come together, and then they continues as one creek, all of which has the same low bottom land, which is thickly overgrown with underbrush. Some of the underbrush has been cleared by the federals as they build bridges and cut roads across these creeks, but the federals don't bother with the underbrush in places that they don't care about. So like right here is still going to be a nightmare for the Confederates of underbrush, creek, swamp, creek, underbrush, all of it. And where we are now is the right of the left of Cleburne's command, which is the footsteps of Colonel Ben Hill's 5th Tennessee Regiment. They're going to come here, reach this position. They're going to have to struggle through it and fight up there. The portions of the 15th Arkansas Regiment, which is the majority of the 15th Arkansas Regiment, are with this part of the brigade. They proceed as skirmishers, and as soon as they make contact with the Federals, the 15th Arkansas falls back onto the reserve. They organize themselves into a cohesive regiment, and they take a position on the right. And so eventually this 15th Arkansas will get slotted in right here when they stop skirmishing and reform. And then, so it'll be 15th Arkansas in this area, 5th Tennessee here, 24th Tennessee under Lieutenant Colonel Peebles down there, and Bates, 2nd Tennessee Regiment, still 500 yards to the rear and on the left of the brigade, advancing in a south to north orientation. Now you'll be happy to know, yesterday I came by here to prospect this walk and make sure that we could all go to the best and funnest places. And so I went down to where Bates guys cross at the end to find out if it would be fun for us to do that. And we're going to go up the road right here. Yeah. All that I could say is cast your mind back to yesterday when you were plonking through the bottom of Tillman Branch and getting turned around and tripped by vines and all that kind of stuff. That's what we would do if we went down there.
So this is Shiloh?
All of this is Shiloh Branch.
And it goes into Tillman?
And it falls into Owl Creek, about a mile down that way.
Okay.
Yeah, and it does it through a low, very impenetrable, swampy morass all the way down to its confluence with Owl Creek. Stop here. I'm going to back up. You guys stay where you are. I'm going to take a real quick stop here so that we can look at the battlefield at one particular minute in time in a way that it affects Cleburne's troops as they make this attack. It's either going to be, as the Confederates are either going to be Hill's 5th over here or the 15th Arkansas over here. And we're telling it, but we're going to tell it real quickly from a Union point of view. Private Robert Fleming belonged to the 77th Ohio Regiment, which is camped up here on top of the hill, and they have a monument there. We visited him on other programs. And both Fleming and other members of the 77th recall that when they were called to arms, their commander, Major Benjamin Fearing, led them off of the hill and into the morass. And so the first position of the 77th Ohio would have been about here. 77th Ohio would have been about here. And what those Federals saw were, as soon as they took their position, they could see Confederate skirmishers chasing their own outposts, their own skirmishers back through the woods. So that's an image you can see from right here. If you turn around and look back up there, see those skirmishers of the 15th Arkansas chasing the outpost troops of the 77th Ohio back down that hill. And then the outpost guys jumped into the creek, scrambled through the creek, and then came up here, and then finally they had a full line of battle. The Confederates advanced into the creek, and then they engaged each other. And there was a short and bloody close-range engagement right about from this here, from the creek to here, and the Confederates fell back from the creek. At which time Major Fearing ordered the 77th Ohio to fall back to the top of the hill. Now, if we go up the hill, if you go over there and visit, you'll find the monument where the 77th spent the vast majority of their morning holding out and fighting. But the first engagement was down here in the bottoms, and the Federals remembered driving the Confederates from the creek and then retreating, and then the Confederates came back, reoccupied the creek, and went up. There's not that much detail in the Confederate account. They don't talk about we went forward, we came back, we went forward, we came back. But that would have been the first encounter of these Confederates as they tried to cross the creek. They encountered the 77th Ohio down here in the bottoms, and they had a short engagement before they advanced again. Let's go. Yeah, no, that's right. Its way into granite and live forever. It's still just writing, and people still miss the whole word. Went to the 2nd Tennessee Regiment, commanded by Colonel William Bate, and we are going to talk about the attack of Bate's 2nd Tennessee upon Buckland's brigade at the exact spot where it happened. Which means we're not going to talk about it here or now. Because they were over there. I'll anticipate the question, why would the monument to Bates Regiment be here instead of over there? Just because when the monument went up, when it was established, Colonel Bate was then Tennessee Senator Bate, U.S. Senator from Tennessee, and the monument goes wherever he wants it to go. And this is the highest hill, and it's
Visible from the road.
It's visible from the road, and people come and visit it. So no, he wouldn't want to be over there. And also, I've read before some chirping from the Federals that said, "No, you never got this far. If you want to build that monument, you should build it down there in the swamp." But no, we are going to. The service of Bates Regiment and Colonel Bate are important, and so we're going to follow them in a little bit. But we have not reached the point on the battlefield where we can't put an X here and say this is where they were. They were further over there, and then moving up and down the hill. Right now, we're probably in the footsteps of Colonel Peebles' 24th Tennessee Regiment. Remember, again, that this was a large brigade, so the regiments tended to be larger than they were at other battles. So if you're on another battlefield, Chickamauga or Gettysburg, a regimental front might be, you might be able to see both ends from the middle. Oh, there's one and there's the other. But the size of these regiments, they're fairly new. The entire brigade is almost 3,000 guys. They go from the brigade goes as far as you can see over there to as far as you can see over there. And the regiments would take up a lot more space than they normally do on other battlefields when you visit them. And so this frontage in front of the 70th Ohio would probably been attacking Colonel Peebles' brigade. Now, I think it's Colonel Hill. I didn't want to carry an actual OR with me all the way through today's program, but I think it's Colonel Hill that uses a very descriptive and educational single word to describe the tactical situations that make the attack. That we went into the creek and then we attacked the enemy up a long hill. He says it was a long hill, and that means the problem or the project of these Confederates is as soon as they leave that creek where we were, it's open country all the way up here. And they're going to be under fire the entire time. And you might recall yesterday Dr. Smith talked about defining the geographic crest of a hill from the military crest of the hill. And if you look at the hill we're on, you'll see that the crest is considerably behind these Union monuments, right? And so the monument of the 70th Ohio Regiment, strategically placing, suppose the 70th Ohio were standing in the exact position where an historian wrote about the 70th Ohio is standing. They are on the military crest, and they have a clear shot at anybody all the way back to the creek. And so as the 24th moves up here, as the 5th moves up over there, as the 15th moves up over there, they are totally exposed to the fire of the Federals who are in their position of choosing on high ground with an open field of fire. And so the initial attack results in a bloody repulse. They fight very hard and they do inflict some casualties, but by and large, the Federals just shoot down on them. And all of these regiments, to some extent, to a lesser extent, but in a similar way, are cut to pieces, just like the 2 regiments on the other side of the almost impassable morass. So let us continue down the park trail toward the next Union monument, because that'll take us closer to Colonel Bates' regiment. Where people get caught up in absolutely we have advanced to roughly the far left of where Cleburne's command was coming up this hill, and so to our right would be Colonel Bates' 2nd Tennessee Regiment coming up the hill. Now, to the left, do yourself a favor and just kind of look into those woods, and you're going to notice that it goes uphill. We're in a ravine. We're in a ravine that drains from the top of the hill to the north to the creek south of us. And at this point, the ridge above Shiloh Branch, we're going to call it Shiloh Ridge, angles toward the creek, okay? It's not just a straight left to right ridge. Because of all these undulations and all this drainage, there's a nose to the ridge that sticks out and goes almost as far as the creek. This area is not a long hill. It's a hill that goes right up to the creek over there. And when Colonel Buckland's Union Brigade of Ohio troops advanced from their camps to that military crest we discussed before to engage Cleburne's troops as they were attacking, the regiment on the right, the Union regiment on the Union right, the 72nd Ohio Regiment, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Herman Canfield, advanced out on to this nose. Arriving there, they could see, Canfield could see, that the Confederates were not attacking straight up out of the creek onto that nose. He could look down to his left and see Bates' regiment coming straight up this ravine, the left of Bates' regiment. So the 72nd Ohio reoriented so that they were on that hill facing this way. They weren't to the north fighting to the south in a straight line like the rest of the brigade. They knew they'd be safe on their right because they could see that nobody else was coming. This was the left of the Confederate line. They reoriented, and then as Cleburne's brigade came up this long hill, where it's long, where we are now, the left of Bates' regiment was right here, and they could shoot right into the left flank. And indeed, in the report, General Cleburne talks about that the first attack on this side of the line was repulsed because the enemy was firing at us from the left. And And now what that meant to the Tennesseans of Colonel Bates' regiment was another disastrous repulse. They came up here, they finally caught up, they closed that 500-yard gap between them and the rest of the brigade. They got up here, they made the attack with the rest of them, and they got shot to pieces from the left. They fell back, they rallied, they attacked again. Colonel Bates got right up in front of his regiment and led them up against it could either be the left flank of the 72nd Ohio or the right flank of the 48th Ohio over here. They came fighting again. Colonel Bates was shot down. Colonel Bates was wounded. His brother, Captain Humphrey Bates, was killed on this ground, making the attack. Major William Doak, the next in command of the regiment, was also killed attacking this position. And finally, the 2nd Tennessee was driven back with the rest of the brigade, but the 2nd Tennessee was driven out of the fight. They were driven out of the fight. They didn't have commanding officers. The men dispersed, and it took a long time to get them back together. To their credit, I don't want to, this is a terrible situation for these guys. I don't want to reflect any discredit on the fact that they were repulsed and did not come back to the army. They were repulsed, and by the next morning, they had reorganized themselves, and they served throughout the 2nd day of the battle. The point I'm trying to make was this flank fire and the fire from in front totally destroyed the regiment, drove them back, and knocked them out of Cleburne's command. The newest additions to Cleburne's command, the guys that just joined the other day, are out of the battle for the rest of the day. And for the time being, so are the 23rd Tennessee, and so are the 6th Mississippi. 3 of 6 regiments are no longer part of Cleburne's command. The largest brigade in Johnston's army is very nearly half the size it was, and they still have not captured a single Union camp. They still have not accomplished a single objective. Now, let's go ahead and leap forward another couple of hours. By 10 o'clock, Anderson's brigade has come up behind Cleburne's brigade and made another attack. Johnson's brigade has come up behind Anderson and Cleburne, made another attack. All by 10 o'clock, all 3 of these brigades, with their men more or less intermixed with each other, the regiments and men more or less intermixed, just swarmed up this hill. And by that time, General Sherman's regiments had been exhausted after 3 hours of fighting, and General Sherman's left was turned, right? We know that about Sherman's command. His left was turned when Wood and Stewart and Russell and some other guys came around his left. And so, about the same time the left of Sherman's division collapsed, this huge, casually organized mob of Confederates who'd been here all morning came just swarming out of the creek and up the long hill, and these guys finally drove these three regiments of Ohio troops from their camps, and at about 10:15 in the morning, the first Union camps in Sherman's front were captured by this swarm of Confederate soldiers that included Cleburne's brigade, Cleburne's troops who've been fighting here since 8 in the morning. Okay, let's move back up to the trail. Of Buckland's brigade. At the time of the battle, none of this stuff is here. You are in the camp. You're amongst the tents of Buckland's brigade. Okay? Continue on up. Camp, and it occurred to me I wanted to add to that, the Union defenders fought for their camps. Okay? There were perfectly good reasons for them to fight for their camps. So when Cleburne's troops and the Confederates drove them from their line of battle, they did fall back to the camps and they tried to defend them. All morning, the Union troops had not expected to lose. They had not gotten up planning on losing a battle and losing their camps that morning. One of the results of that was the wounded were sent to the camp. As they fought all morning, the wounded were sent to the camp. Now the line was breaking, they were going to have to fall back, and the most vulnerable, wounded and the sick soldiers are still in the camp. So they're going to need to get out of the camp. Also, some guys are going to want to get their stuff. other things like that. In the case of the 72nd Ohio, they had rolled up their colors and put them in a wagon before going into battle, and they forgot the colors, and then as they fell back, they forgot the wagon, and the Confederates ended up capturing their colors, not because they captured it in battle, but because they found it packed away in the wagon. But the point was, in that area where we stopped to say this was the camp, the Federals fought for that. And so the Confederates had to fight to take those camps. And you can imagine the chaos and confusion of that kind of fight happening within the tents, amongst the tents, and in the camps. By the time we reach the position we are now, the Federals are falling back quickly toward the Hamburg-Purdy Road, and the Confederates are pursuing them. Colonel Hill, I believe, writes in his report that upon taking the camps, the regiments of Cleburne's command stopped. They stopped and he reformed them. So it's my impression that the part of the battle that we're taking right now, from the point of view of combat, is those other troops. Anderson and Johnson are continuing the pursuit as the Federals fall back, and they're giving them some room. Also notice we're gonna cross a pretty neat ravine right now. Even in an area that's high ground where the Yankees have their camps, we still have some pretty good drainage. Just take note of that as we cross it, and say that's part of the Shiloh battlefield, and it's part of what they had to deal with as they marched across it. They didn't always mention it. They didn't always mention that there was a great big ravine. They just said we advanced.
Now we're going around the right end of the Federal line now.
We're going around we will be near the right end of Buckland's line after he falls back. Once we reach the road, we'll be pretty much on Buckland's right. But the 1st Brigade of Sherman's division
It's still down there.
is still over here. Right.
Okay.
Hmm? As I told the people at the front, all I really wanted to do was avoid quarters 50 so that we didn't, walk through their yard. And we succeeded in doing that. I intended to go around the other end of quarters 50, but we went around this end. So under other circumstances, that might be an oopsie, but
We'll take it.
yeah, we can see where we're supposed to be from here. So yeah, we're in a position where at the time that the Confederates took the Union camps, Colonel Hill wrote that he stopped to reorganize Cleburne's regiments, and then the rest went on. And so the rest of those guys, Anderson's brigade, Johnson's brigade, Pond over here, attacked through this area, and they totally routed the Federals that were in this area when they made that attack, around 10:30 to 11 on the morning of April 6th. They totally routed the Federals in this area, and they blew a hole in the Federal line. Now, there was one brigade, McDowell's brigade, which was down over here, which was not disorganized by the attack. In fact, they didn't have much resistance at all, but they were alone and isolated as the Confederates broke through the center and continued on. So Colonel McDowell led his troops on a long march around the end of the Confederates until he met General Sherman back in Jonesfield. But the Confederates continued to come through here. Now, after reorganizing his regiments, Colonel Hill led them forward. Now, I'm going to take another step back to General Cleburne for a second. I told you he was going back and forth. He's either coming to the left to see how things are going there and leaving orders, and then going back to the right to try to reorganize the 23rd Tennessee and the 6th Mississippi regiments. At the time of this attack, General Cleburne was over on the right. He was with the two regiments, 23rd Tennessee and 6th Mississippi. So as these regiments, as Cleburne's command, moved forward, it was under the command of Colonel Benjamin Hill of the 5th Tennessee. And they followed in the rear of the Confederate advance And so as they transited this ground, they did, and we're going to go pretty much in their steps now, it was in the rear of the Confederate attack. And so they're moving to the front and trying to find a place for themselves in the Confederate line of battle now that they're reorganized, rested, rearmed, have more ammunition, and they're ready to attack. So let's follow in their footsteps until we actually get to the next place where they can take a place in the Confederate line of battle. Got me? Let's go.
Hey Matt, can you imagine all those boys trying to figure out how to get us on top of all these mountains?
Getting the flavor of it there, Tony?
So once they got called, I got stuck for 20 hours in and I never got, they came back just in time for hurricane. Following in the footsteps of Hill's troops as they move behind the Confederate line that is advancing. We're in the area called Crescent Field. Owl Creek is to our west over here. The main part of the battle is roaring to our right over here, over this next ravine. And some of the troops that were in reserve are now moving to the front, and mostly the Kentucky Brigade. And the Kentucky Brigade is moving through this Crescent Field. They're going to redeploy to the right and begin fighting to the east. Other Confederates will follow behind them, notably a portion of Colonel Milton Russell's brigade from Pope's Corps. They follow, and then they join the line of the Kentuckians on the left, reorienting to the west, fighting against Sherman in his counterattack, right? This is part of that counterattack that we talk about when we're following the Federals up and down over there. And then finally, Hill with his guys is going to come up right at the end, and they're going to transit this field while the fighting is going on to their right so that they can join the end of the line at the far end of the field. So what we're going to do now is another march straight across Crescent Field until we get into the woods near the road on the north end. Got me? Let's go. Where Colonel Hill is ready to rejoin the battle, and he is bringing his regiments into line, and he's got the 5th Tennessee, the 24th Tennessee, and the 15th Arkansas are all here together. The 2nd Tennessee is out of the battle until tomorrow, and the 23rd Tennessee and the 6th Mississippi went the other way around the almost impassable morass, and now they are in the center of the battlefield. Yeah, we're at stop number 426. Let me, before I continue, consult where we're going next. Line of battle that is working around the flank of a major Union counterattack. Within an hour of that disaster for the Federals on the Hamburg-Purdy Road, they had rallied in the Jones Field, and at least one brigade from General Sherman's division, McDowell's 1st Brigade, marched around the Confederates to join their comrades in Jones Field. Thus reinforced, General McClernand and General Sherman launched a counterattack that drove the Confederates back. They drove the Confederates all the way back to Hamburg-Purdy over here. Now the problem from the Union point of view was that their flank did not extend all the way out here. Their right flank was exposed as they attacked. So the Confederates that came west of the counterattack could curl around the flank of General Sherman's division and flank it. And one by one, General Sherman's regiments that were counterattacking to the south had to turn to the west to protect themselves against these Confederates. And these Confederates, again, as I said before, the Kentucky Brigade on the other end of the field, just a few hundred yards down here, a couple of regiments from Milton Russell's brigade, and then down here on the end, 3 regiments of Cleburne's troops under Colonel Benjamin Hill, and they're going to fight for more than an hour, from noon until 2. 2 hours here, a set-piece fight. They've reorganized and refit. They've gotten more ammunition. So, from this position, on the other side of the ravine, the Federals are there and they're firing back. We have a 2-hour firefight straight across this ravine, volley for volley. And then finally, it starts on the Confederate right. The Confederate Kentucky Brigade gets up a rebel yell, and they charge the Federals that are across from them, and they charge across the ravine, and they break the Union line. And then both of these elements of Russell's brigade here and Hill's soldiers here attack with the Kentuckians to drive the Federals from their position. They were here for 2 hours. Yeah, they were here until noon. We should feel good. It's only 11:40. We're like 2.5 hours ahead of them, right? We're doing great. So yeah, our next position is another orienteering project. We're gonna head straight from here to a tablet that's approximately 60 degrees from this one, and good luck. You didn't hire the best scout to get you there, but I think we've got some pretty good orienteering people here. So let's take our bearings and go one more time.
Of course, my compass.
Alan Neff is here with us, who is a scholar who's written on the 70th Ohio Regiment. And we are now at the position where the 70th Ohio engaged. This is the position that the Union troops were during the engagement we just talked about. So, Alan, can you give us a few minutes of sidebar on the 70th?
So after McClernand and Sherman's divisions fall back, they reform, and they come down here. McClernand basically continues forward, and so you have a refuse line almost at a 90-degree angle. They put the 70th here. General Sherman actually puts the 70th here on the flank because they're the largest regiment that he has still left in the division, and puts them here, and then McDowell's brigade kind of deploys down this line over here. And you can't really tell based on how deep this gulch is here, but as you go up, the gulch gets flatter and flatter and flatter. So that's kind of a disadvantage that McDowell's brigade has down here, where they're fighting mainly the Kentuckians and then the 41st Alabama, is they're essentially fighting on flatter ground, and the 70th Ohio has the advantage of having this nice big gulch down here that's full of water from 2.5 weeks of rain, and they're fighting here on the military crest.
This is their left line, left flank?
This is the center.
That's the center, okay.
So essentially you would have had 1st Battalion over here under DeWitt Clinton Loudon, the left battalion, and then it doesn't say it in the report, but what I've kind of guesstimated is that because you have Russell's 2 regiments over here, and then you have Cleburne's 3 regiments over here, more than likely they refused as well right here. So you would have had 1st Battalion here fronting against 41st Alabama and Russell's regiments, and you would have had the 2nd Battalion over here under the major of the regiment, kind of fronting at maybe a 60 to 90 degree angle off to the right. What happens is Traboux's brigade is at an angle, and the leftmost regiments of Traboux's brigade are actually down in this gulch, which is filling with smoke over the 2 hours of fighting. As Traboux's men pick up the yell and come up the hill, they notice right before they actually launch the charge that the regiments down here for McDowell's brigade, as they're knocking holes in it, they're not consolidating. And so Colonel Traboux goes and says, hey, I think we can drive them since they're not consolidated regiments now and they're kind of in fragments of groups. And so when he sends the yell up, right when they get anywhere between 20 to 50 yards away, McDowell's regiments start to break, which leaves the 70th Ohio over here isolated off to the side. And then they essentially, and you can tell by the casualty reports, because this is really the only big fighting for McDowell's brigade in either of the 2 days. They're not really involved much in the second day. These regiments break, and it seems like the Confederates are able to take aim shots, and then the 70th kind of fights going backwards. But if you don't have this resistance here, you have McClernand's whole division up there with parts of 2 brigades and then Traboux's almost entire brigade minus the artillery coming up on their flank. So they have to put up some kind of resistance here, otherwise you're going to pincer and cut them in between. But it is a pretty precipitous retreat back from here, and then they're actually going to do a wheeling movement and connect with McClernand's division over here as they work their way back into Jones Field, and then they'll deploy both divisions, the remainder of those divisions. And there are some regiments that have come up from Pittsburgh Landing that have refitted and gotten more ammunition, such as the 48th Ohio, 72nd Ohio, and they're all going to join together on the north side of Jones Field as the Confederates move towards the Hornets' Nest position at that point. They don't want anything to do with McClernand and Sherman's division anymore after fighting them for essentially 6 hours, 7 hours. So it's a really intense fight here, and just to show you how intense, the 70th Ohio, they lose about 100 direct casualties, wounded and killed in the 2 days of fighting. McDowell's regiments over here, they'll lose 160, 200, 250 men. So it was a very intense fight here for 2 hours, and especially on that charge from Traboux. And more than likely you have fleeing federal soldiers that are coming over with well-aimed shots from Traboux and Russell's brigades firing into them from the rear, which causes those severe casualties as well. So really, really hectic, really intense fighting, but if they don't fight here and they don't launch that counterattack, there's a chance this whole wing of the Confederate Army comes across and hits the Hornets' Nest position in the flank. And so you could have more than Prentiss, you could have Hurlbut, you could have Stewart's brigade down there on the far side of the battlefield that are getting hit from the sides. This is a really important part of the battle, the counterattack. And Bjorn has said this before, you know, it's one of the crucial and decisive moments of the Battle of Shiloh, their decision to launch this counterattack. But it really didn't have a chance of succeeding. You have essentially 55, 60%, maybe 55% of the Confederate Army over here fighting on this wing, and then the rest down more towards the Hornets' Nest and getting over towards Duncan Field.
Yep. Yeah, buying time.
Yeah.
Buying time.
And buying time for not only Buell to come up
Yeah.
to transit the river, but also protecting the Snake Creek Bridge and allowing the walls.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Colin. All right. And then, yeah, immediately in their front was probably elements of Russell or with Cleburne over here. But we are going to follow the park trail up here, turn left, and then head down to the next Confederate marker, and that'll be a wayside that'll get us quickly to our next Cleburne marker. Got it? Let's move. From the last position, we had a Pills tablet. They launched their attack from that position. As we've seen, they either skirted the right flank or encountered the right flank of the 70th Ohio, but between all the other attacks, they drove them back, and then they continued the same momentum going forward, starting the march at about 2 o'clock, and then coming up to this point at about 2:30, advancing, in some cases fighting, but finally getting to this position at 2:30. By 2:30, General Sherman and General McClernand had rallied at the counterattack having failed. They had rallied their troops in the Jones Field, and if you look out there and you can see the Jones Field. You can see the brightness out there. So the Federals are right up there, and this is the next place that Hill becomes engaged as they come up against the stiffening resistance in the Jones Field. Now, eventually after that, they sort of, from fighting here, they began to close in because the Federals, Sherman and McClernand, are falling back that way. These Confederates do not pursue them, like elements of Pond's brigade and some of the cavalry, Hardee's people over there, kind of keep going this way. Hill is the left flank of the whole Confederate army that is now sweeping around what had been the counterattack and moving toward the Hornet's Nest. The orientation is no longer toward Jones Field and driving Sherman and McClernand back. They're retreating. They're now marching to the sound of the guns, and they're going to move towards the Hornet's Nest. And we're going to do that by going up to the road and over here a little bit and finding another marker and then taking more coordinates and then heading to our last stop. Okay? You were more enthusiastic earlier this morning. We're going to talk about the first day of Cleburne's command, and we are. But I can't ignore the fact that we came to Cleburne's second day tablet and we are standing in front of it. As the tablet explains, by the second day of the battle, General Cleburne by that time had gotten back with his brigade, and he had about 600 men at the beginning of the second day, from almost 3,000. And they were involved in a couple of different fights. They eventually were engaged right here. They were ordered to attack, and Cleburne said there was two Union artillery batteries concentrating their fire right up there. There's a crossfire. Cleburne said we can't do it, and the order was confirmed. The guys attacked, and they were utterly and completely devastated and thrown back. And as the tablet tells us, by the time they fell back, 58 members of Cleburne's brigade were left. And that would bring us to, we're going to continue to the end of the first day, but I want to impress upon everybody again, almost 3,000 guys in the largest brigade in Johnston's army. When Cleburne finally ordered them to the rear, they were 58. All right? Question, yeah.
The 23rd Tennessee, weren't they with the 6th Mississippi?
They were.
So they made their way back over here.
They were. They did, yeah. But they're not here. This is April 7th.
Right.
This is the next day. But
Right.
they did rejoin the rest of the brigade, yeah.
What happened to the 6th?
The 6th, the 6th advanced to where we're going to eat our lunch. And so when we get to...
Shortcutting.
Yeah. They advanced to that position by about noon on April 6th, and then they were withdrawn from the battle entirely. Yep. And they had about 60 guys left when they withdrew from the battle.
So why were they withdrawn?
They were done. They're totally shot to pieces.
So they didn't basically want the whole, like, every boy in that town to be wiped out. Is that kind of mindset?
Yeah, that might have been their mindset. I think probably the unit was ineffective. They were too small. And I would think that Cleburne probably looked at them and said, "You're done. You know, you're done for this battle." They certainly need to go back and get some of the guys who could still fight together to fight again another day. Yeah. But right, yeah, Brandon, Mississippi was fed a large percentage of the 6th Mississippi, and so a lot of Brandon, Mississippi kids died up there on Rayfield that morning. Yep. All right, who set us on our 90-degree course? Let's follow it.
Tony's thinking maybe I can catch Carol falling down today.
Thank you.
The commentary is free.
Tony gets close to this conversation with the video running, thinking he might catch something. It's incriminating information.
Cool. Jump, drop, and roll. I don't know if that's a good idea. That's not a good idea. Just jump.
Tony, did you catch that? Great to the gazelle, man.
That was not very close.
Here you go, Tony. Right?
There you
Sorry.
I think we're still ahead. They didn't get here till 4:30. It's 12:30. So yeah, that next leg of the advanced right on through two drainage branches of Tillman Ravine and crossed Tillman Creek. And they advanced fighting to this position. The Federals at this position, elements of General McClernand's division, fell back from Jones Field. It had a defensive position that was centered around Cavalry Field. And about the time that, just before the time that these guys got to this position, in other words, when they were transiting these ravines, was the same time that Louisiana brigade made the attack that we didn't follow yesterday because of all the windfall down in Tillman Branch. But this is part of the same fight that's going on at Cavalry Field, where we ate lunch yesterday. And some of you followed Dr. Smith up Tillman Branch and then came up to this tablet yesterday. And so at 4:30, by 4:30, Hill and his regiments had reached this position. Now, at that time, General McClernand joined them.
What's going on, guys?
Yeah. How you guys doing? There we go. At that time, General Cleburne, an actual Irishman with an Irish name, joined them. General Cleburne had been trying to get together the right two regiments that had been separated back over at the Impassable Morass. And a small element of the 6th Mississippi, and then finally several hundred men of the 23rd Tennessee got together. And then General Cleburne was able to wrangle in the 8th Arkansas Regiment, which belongs to General Wood's brigade. But with these 3 little regiments, Cleburne now had something to fight with. And he led them in an attack roughly against the area in the review field, if you know where that is. Again, he would have gone straight north from where he was, not around the end like Hill brought his guys. And so they were involved in a very difficult combat, and that combat eventually took them to a position near what we now know as Ruggles Battery. When they got to Ruggles Battery, the 6th Mississippi was totally exhausted, and they only had a few guys left. So Cleburne sent them out of the battle. Cleburne then went looking for Hill. Hill by this time was way over here. Cleburne went all the way around looking for Hill. He couldn't find him. He found, I think, General Hardee. General Hardee told him, you need to get together all these stragglers that are wandering around behind the battle lines, sacking the Union camps and all the rest. You need to get them together and move them into the battle. And so Cleburne spent probably half an hour to an hour trying to assemble stragglers. And he tells us that such men would be of no use, to paraphrase him. He generally says finding that such men would be of no use even if I got them together. He took off again looking for Colonel Hill. Continued to search for him and found him here. Or rather found him at the other side of Tillman Branch Ravine. And joined him, and then they attacked to this position, and here they drove Federals, the elements of McClernand's division, back from this position. And the 23rd Tennessee joined them. So now all the 5th Tennessee and the 24th Tennessee and the 15th Arkansas and the 23rd Tennessee were all together now. And so at this time they were totally out of ammunition. All ammunition had been exhausted. The men were exhausted. They couldn't fight anymore. And so Cleburne sent large details of men, detached them, and sent them back to look for supply wagons. And then they rested here until the guys came back with a resupply of ammunition. And then once they were resupplied and rested, Cleburne ordered them back into the battle. As the tablet suggests to us, by that time the Hornet's Nest position was surrendering. Grant was falling back to the last line. Cleburne essentially took his guys due east toward the gunboats. And then after basically getting across this ravine here, encountered staff officers from General Beauregard that informed him that the battle was done for the day and that General Cleburne should take his men to the rear. They were not engaged again after this combat. That night, Cleburne took his guys back to some Union camps. He didn't know where they were, so I don't know where they were. He did encounter Colonel Forrest that night, the cavalry commander, Colonel Forrest. And Colonel Forrest had been over here at the Indian Mounds, right? He was scouting out and he saw the Bjorn was coming over and he wanted to find somebody and warn him. He wanted to find General Hardee. He said, General Cleburne, do you know where General Hardee is? And found General Cleburne sitting on a tree stump. General Cleburne, do you know where General Hardee is? He goes, I don't know where General Hardee is. I don't know where I am. I don't know where this tree stump is. And then Forrest had to go on and continue to try to find General Hardee. In the morning, Cleburne regrouped his guys and moved into battle. We visited the last position that he faced, that he had his guys engaged. And as we saw, when the second day of the battle ended, the almost 3,000 man brigade was reduced to 58 soldiers, the largest brigade in General Johnston's army. Now let's detail that just a little bit. Certainly the butcher's bill of killed and wounded was severe. A lot of guys were killed and wounded. Also, a lot of guys were detached. Guys were detached and sent back to get ammo. Guys were detached and escorted prisoners to the rear. Guys were detached to help the wounded. And then guys decided that Shiloh was not for them. And although Cleburne and his command are a well-disciplined and courageous batch of guys, that doesn't mean that they don't leak stragglers to the rear, just like every other brigade. And so a lot of guys, when the 58 were left in the ranks, there were a lot of killed and wounded, a lot of people detached, a lot of people sent to the rear, and a lot of guys who should have still been in the ranks. Yet, let us not judge. We are not judged. I'm tired. Yeah. And after 2 days of what we've just done, while fighting in the rain, you cannot imagine the exhaustion. You cannot imagine the exhaustion these guys were suffering. These guys were brave, high-minded, disciplined soldiers. And if they broke, that's just because that's the end of what a person can do. It's the end of what a man can do in combat. Some people can go a little further, but I think Cleburne's command reached the end of its line on April 7th. Cleburne and his men did retreat back to Corinth, and he reformed them, had a pretty good strong brigade again within a few weeks, and they participated in the defense of Corinth. General Cleburne and his brigade. Later, General Cleburne moved on to division command. Lots of other different kinds of soldiers served under him. He led a division into Kentucky, fought at the battles of Richmond and Perryville. They were heavily engaged and successful at the Battle of Stones River, in a battle that the Confederates did not win. Chickamauga, the Atlanta Campaign, and then, as most of us probably know, Patrick Cleburne and his division made their last great assault at Franklin, Tennessee on the 30th of November, 1864, and that is when Patrick Ronan Cleburne fell at the front of his division, assaulting the Union works in front of the Carter Gin House at Franklin. And so General Cleburne did not reach the end of the war. Cleburne's command continued to fight with valor and distinction throughout the war, but it was not until after the war was over and General Cleburne, his body was moved back to Helena, Arkansas, that we began to remember, historians began to remember Cleburne and his command as one of the legendary divisions of any army in the Civil War. Courageous, disciplined soldiers that followed their Irish-born Arkansas general across many fields and fought bravely for the Confederacy all the way up to the end. And unfortunately, their commander was not with them at the end. But that brings us to the end of our program. And it appears as though we've all made it. I can't promise you'll make it past Franklin, but we made it this far. Well, thank you. We have just enough time. If we want to eat anywhere around 1 o'clock or shortly after, we need to go to lunch right now. But I'm happy to take questions if anybody wants to stand and ask questions for a couple of minutes.